Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first International UNITAR Research Conference on Climate Security, organized in partnership with the Technological University Dublin, University Oberta de Catalunya, and the World Association for Disaster and Emergency Medicine. We'll begin with the first official welcome address from Dr. Ursula Sauter, representative of the Bonn Mayor's Office. Dr. Sauter, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry if I kept you waiting, although when I came in, everybody was having a good time chatting, so I'm not too sorry. But I'm glad I'm here again. I was here just a couple of months ago. It's a pleasure to be back. So, Excellencies, Mr. Executive Director, dear members of the TU Dublin Senior Management, could you please wave? Thank you. It's always terrible. You come somewhere and you greet people and you go, hello, and you don't know who they are. So this is who you are, dear Mr. Langan. Dear academic community, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here today to welcome you on behalf of the city of Bonn. I'm a deputy mayor of the city. Mayor Katja Dörner would have loved to be here, but her schedule is even tighter than mine. So she's sending her best wishes. She's glad you're here again. Today's conference is entitled Climate Security, Peace and Security Consequences of Climate Change. With that focus, I think you've chosen the right venue. Bonn has sustainability as its focus. You know that we're Germany's only UN city. We are still the seat of parts of the ministries. So the development ministry, for instance, is here, as are many academic institutions. Bonn is Germany's topmost university of excellence, meaning it has 6 excellence clusters. It's very interdisciplinary, so that works well in your context. We also have about 270 NGOs here, most of them devoted to sustainability. We have 26 UN entities here now, one of which is UNITAR. So I think you're well placed here. Climate change and related topics, and I think these days all topics are related to climate change, vital for our stakeholders. And your conference builds a bridge to the issue of security policy. I'm very pleased that you're doing that because the interdependencies between the two are crucial. My foster daughter comes from Eritrea. She left the country because it was getting harder and harder for her family to make a living because of climate change. She left. She's not the only one. There are many people who are leaving their countries because of climate change, and they're heading north. And that is bound to create conflict in one way or another. So I think linking the two subject matters is great, particularly in this day and age when conflicts abound, wars, conflicts, major challenges, poverty is on the rise, human rights violations are on the rise. So high quality research, which is what you are focused on, that allows capacity building and knowledge and information and experience sharing is vital as well. In this day and age, you need to present facts and figures to people to make yourself, heard, to be able to prove what you're doing. So what you're also doing is providing the UN member states with the necessary data for their work. And multilateralism is what we need right now. We can't do things on our own, particularly when it comes to peace. Germany is very happy to celebrate its 50th anniversary as a member of the United Nations this year. And of course, as Germany's only, we like to stress that, only UN city in Germany, we're particularly happy as well. So information is what you're devoted to. We need that. We need rational discussion about matters, not bellies talking and feelings talking, and we can't do that without academic research. We need that desperately to tie in all the individual actors, and we need that for all levels. In Bonn, we believe that informing our citizens is very important. So we need to break down what you do into smaller increments and feed them. Hopefully they're going to be 8 to our citizens. So again, we're happy that you're part of our family. We hope that you will remain so. And of course, I wish you a fruitful discussion, conference, and let us know how it went. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sauter. So we now have a pre-recorded message from Mr. Nikhil Seth, Executive Director of UNITAR.
Excellencies, academics, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it is an honor to welcome you to UNITAR's inaugural conference focusing on the nexus between climate change, peace and security. This conference is a unique opportunity to remind us of the ambition of the United Nations policy brief, Our Common Agenda, a new agenda for peace. This policy brief represents a call to action for global cooperation and a blueprint for addressing the pressing security and peace challenges faced by our world today. In the next few minutes, I will endeavor to outline the key elements of this policy brief and also highlight their significance in shaping a more peaceful and prosperous future for all. I will also highlight how UNITAR works towards shaping a more peaceful and prosperous future. First and foremost, emphasis must be placed on the urgent need for preventive diplomacy. Preventing conflicts from arising in the first place is far more effective and cost-efficient than dealing with their consequences. By investing in diplomacy, mediation, and dialogue, we can address the root causes of conflicts, promote understanding, and build trust among nations and communities. This approach not only reduces human suffering but also creates an environment conducive to sustainable development and peace. Another crucial element is the call for inclusive and participatory governance. We continue to highlight the importance of empowering marginalized communities, including women, youth, indigenous people, in decision-making processes. By ensuring their active involvement, we can foster social cohesion, reduce inequalities, and promote peace and stability. Inclusive governance also strengthens the legitimacy of institutions and enhances their ability to respond to the needs and aspirations of all people. Furthermore, UNITAR remains committed to highlight the significance of sustainable development as a driver of peace. It recognizes the interconnectedness between peace, security, and development, emphasizing that sustainable development is not possible without peace, and peace cannot be achieved without sustainable development. By promoting economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability, we can address the root causes of conflicts, mitigate the impacts of climate change, and foster resilient societies. We also continue to underscore the importance of upholding human rights and the rule of law, international and natural law. It emphasizes the need for justice, accountability, and the protection of fundamental freedoms. By ensuring that human rights are respected, we can create an environment that is conducive to peace, social cohesion, and inclusive governance. Upholding the rule of law is essential for preventing and resolving conflicts, as it provides a framework for peaceful dispute resolution and ensures the fair and equitable treatment of all individuals. Lastly, UNITAR recognizes the need for revitalizing multilateralism and strengthening global cooperation. In an increasingly interconnected world, no single nation can tackle the complex challenges alone. UNITAR's strategic objectives facilitates project partnerships that allow and facilitate collective action, international cooperation, and the strengthening of multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, and collaboration with universities in creating new knowledge constructs and paradigms, and cooperating in open and actionable research for the acceleration and implementation of the SDGs. By working together, we can address common threats such as climate change, terrorism, and pandemics, and build a more peaceful and prosperous future for all. In conclusion, the United Nations policy brief, Our Common Agenda, A New Agenda for Peace, presents a comprehensive and forward-thinking approach to addressing the challenges of our time. By prioritizing preventive diplomacy, inclusive governance, sustainable development, human rights, and multilateral cooperation, we can pave the way for a more peaceful and prosperous world. Let us seize this opportunity to unite our efforts and work towards a future where peace, justice, and shared prosperity prevail. Finally, I also wish you success in your deliberations during the next 2 days of the conference. Thank you very much.
Joining us online, we have Dr. Luisa Neto, who is the president of Instituto Nacional de Administración.
Good afternoon to you all. Excellencies, dear colleagues, thank you for this invitation that also stresses new developments of the relationship between INA and UNITAR. And let me tell you that Portugal was indeed the first country to mark Sustainability Day like a commitment with a political agenda with the 25 September that when United Nations defined the 17 development goals that must be implemented by all countries by 2030, with the aim of building a fairer, more dignified, inclusive, and sustainable world. I do think that we have to look at this issue as a way of balancing the binomial of redefining a common good and also as an opportunity. First, in what concerns the common good, from the outset, the panorama of our discussion cannot fail to include, obviously, the environmental dimension that definitely entered the agenda of political debate, and that, regardless of the skepticism of some, is now also a social issue. The importance of political geography rethinks the concept of sovereignty and permanent sovereignty over natural resources, brings geography and law face to face, and raises challenges for the regulation of space, for the concession of public services, and for land management. The interest of sustainable development has justified the realization that ecological threat ignores national borders and that a healthy environment is a universal heritage, although with a clear value for the purposes of economic globalization, and that requires multi-level actions and, even upstream, a new ecological policy that highlights the vulnerability of a meeting between present and future generations and cooperation and solidarity. This idea of an intangible common good unites us all on a global scale in this common home of humanity. And when we consider the damage to the environment as a public damage and a possible liability, we really assume that the social environment issue is recognized as part of the social state of law. So this common good, which is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also in the Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and also that had its eventual breakthrough in 1968 when Resolution 28 identified the relationship between the quality of the human environment and the enjoyment of basic human rights, or when the International Conference on Human Rights held in Tehran called for a balance between technical scientific progress and the intellectual, spiritual, cultural, and moral upliftment of humanity, had also a milestone in the United Nations Stockholm Conference, obviously, and moreover, in the what happened in the with the Resolution 34, Human Rights and the Environment of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights of 1990, that linked environment, development, and human rights. And that obviously provided a new line of development until the Rio Conference in 1992, in which Portugal, and also I noted for mere curiosity, led the European Union's participation. So it is worth remembering that the United Nations Human Rights Council has repeatedly stated that climate change poses an immediate and far-reaching threat to people and communities around the world and has implications for the full enjoyment of human rights. And although with the pitfalls of some positions, and although the Rio Declaration avoided using any human rights language, 2 years after the Rio conference, UNESCO, in cooperation also with the Coastal team, sponsored a meeting of experts held by the Tricontinental Institute for Parliamentary Democracy and Human Rights in Tenerife, Spain, and had to deal for the first time with the rights of future generations that would become the Universal Declaration for the Human Rights of Future Generations. And so, however, and even with the more recent content of the 2017 Paris Agreement, which has led to some, well, sadly well-known misgivings, it is notoriously difficult to determine the densification of the content and scope of what is a substantive right to environment of a certain quality in this sense. And as a result of this uncertainty and vagueness, this consideration of our common good that we've been talking about seems to focus more on efforts to improve procedural tools like access to information, participation in public policy decision-making process, availability of legal remedies to repair environmental damage, and also the consideration of due process of law, and to rely on existing rights, both substantive and objective, in order to accommodate this emerging new common good across the boards. Well, we know that wicked problems don't have simple solutions, and so therefore not only climate change is a source of stress for the enjoyment of human rights, but also climate change mitigation and adaptation policies themselves are also potentially a source of other challenges. So the questions of collective causality also lead us to considering other concepts of victims, and we need creativity to set up the duty to act. Because although the link between climate change and human rights has really been established by science, nowadays its connection and the legal level is still in progress. So guaranteeing the enjoyment of human rights in an era of climate change is therefore acting on a knife's edge. So the second demand, after reasoning about this common good, is obviously to move on to the second point, to see an opportunity in what concerns political and administrative intervention. So the fact is, our system is a single global intangible asset, and we have to deal with the consequences of this possible tragedy of our global common good. And so I emphasize this framework because it seems to me that all of them are the subject of the need of reflection in what concerns this moment of opportunity that lies ahead. So opportunity to clearly determine the need for training in compliance with the guidelines in this area, opportunity for the state that nowadays expands over time because it calls for intergenerational solidarity, opportunity for a public administration that revisits the characteristics of subsidiarity, of general principles, of inner straight principles such as precautions, opportunity for a public administration that overcomes also the rigid distinction between private and public, opportunity for public administration and intervention that reflects on the evolution of technical and scientific knowledge, moreover on the fields of biology, ecology, chemistry, physics, and others, with a consequent reinforcement of the technical components. And also an opportunity for a public administration that takes on the role of driving forces and limits of public policies as a factor in promoting social innovation backed by technologies and artificial intelligence also. So sustainability can be seen really as a set of ideas, strategies, and other attitudes that are, well, correct, economically viable, socially just, and culturally diverse. But sustainable is what can be sustained, supported, defended. And so this is why we have to move from the whole of government perspective to the whole of society perspective. And in a democracy, there is no power without responsibility. So dialogue in our democracy has to be really set upon these issues. Sometimes we have discarded them by lack of clarifications or by some ideological fundamentalism. But that time, I think it's over. And on us, on all of us here, there, where you are in Bonn, falls the responsibility to create the conditions for this common home, which is projected for 2030, and which is the horizon of our journeys, of our conscious citizenship. And so this is our committed home here and there, and I bid you best wishes for this two-day conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Luisa. So we will proceed to the inaugural speeches. Our first speaker is Mr. Frank Borchers, Chief of Division for Peace Office in Bonn. The floor is yours, Mr. Borchers.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, honorable guests. It is with great pleasure and a sense of urgency that I stand in front of you today to address the critical nexus of peace, security, and climate impact in the international system. The challenges we face in this interconnected world demand on collective attention, collaboration, and swift action. Climate change poses an unparalleled threat to the stability and security of nations across the globe. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and environmental degradation, sorry for that, are not only causing immense human suffering, but also exacerbating existing social, economic, and political tensions. The consequences of climate change have the potential to ignite conflicts, displace communities, and undermine the progress we have made towards peace and prosperity. The nexus between peace, security, and climate impact is undeniable. As we strive to build a more peaceful world, we must recognize that peace cannot be achieved in isolation from the environmental challenges we face. The impacts of climate change, such as the resource scarcity, food insecurity, and forced migration, have the potential to fuel social unrest, political instability, and even armed conflicts. Moreover, the effects of climate change do not respect borders. They transcend national boundaries, affecting entire regions and requiring international cooperation to address effectivity. No country can stand alone in the face of this global crisis. It is only through collective action, shared responsibilities, and robust international partnerships that we can confront the intertwined challenges of peace, security, and climate change. Our response to the crisis must be multifaceted. We must strengthen our efforts to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, transition to clean and sustainable energy sources, and promote environmental sustainability. Simultaneously, we must adapt to the inevitable changes brought about by climate change, supporting vulnerabilities communities and countries in building resilience and ensuring their security. It is crucial that we integrate climate considerations in our peace and security frameworks. This includes addressing the root causes of conflicts, fostering inclusive governance, and promoting sustainable development. By doing so, we can help prevent future conflicts, promote human rights, and lay the foundations of a more peaceful and sustainable world. Today, as we gather here, let us reaffirm our commitment to the nexus of peace, security, and climate impact. Let us recognize that the pursuit of peace and security is inseparable from the imperative of addressing climate change. Together, we can forge a path towards a more secure, stable, and sustainable future for all of us. Thank you very much.
I now have a pre-recorded message from Mr. Everest Karambisi, Director of Division for Peace at UNITAR.
Your Excellencies, university partners, faculty, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, it is an honor to welcome you to the Division for Peace inaugural conference. The Peace Division of the United Nations Institutes for Training and Research, UNITAR, plays a vital role in contributing to peace-building efforts around the world. The division focuses on capacity development, training, knowledge sharing, and collaborative partnerships with universities in areas related to conflict prevention, conflict resolution, peace building, peacekeeping, and post-conflict recovery and reconstruction. Our work encompasses various activities that directly contribute to peace building at multiple levels. Here are some key ways in which the Peace Division of UNITAR contributes to promote peace. First, training and capacity development. The Peace Division designs and delivers training programs, workshops, courses, including higher education programs to enhance the knowledge and skills of individuals and institutions involved in peace building. Second, by providing targeted capacity development initiatives, the division helps build the capacity of peace builders, enabling them to contribute effectively to peace-building processes. Third, technical expertise and advisory services. UNITAR's Peace Division offers technical expertise and advisory services to governments, international organizations, and other stakeholders involved in peace building. It provides guidance on peace building strategies, policy development, and the program implementation. The division experts collaborate with partners to develop context-specific approaches and the frameworks for addressing conflict and peace-building sustainable peace. Research and knowledge sharing. The Peace Division conducts open, actionable research, generates knowledge, and shares best practice in peace building. It collects and disseminates valuable information through publications, reports, online resources, and university partnerships. By fostering knowledge exchange and sharing lessons learned, the division contributes to evidence-based peace-building practices and promotes innovation in the field. The networking and partnership. UNITAR's Peace Division actively engages in networking and partnerships with a wide range of actors involved in peace building, including governments, civil society organizations, academia, and regional organizations, including community-based organizations. By fostering collaboration and the cooperation, the division strengthens the collective effort to promote peace, sustainability, and reconciliation in conflict-affected regions. SDG 16 is focused on promoting peaceful, just, and inclusive societies and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. It recognizes that peace, justice, and strong institutions are essential foundations for sustainable development. SDG 16 encompasses a range of targets that aim to address various aspects to peace and governance and the rule of law. SDG 17 is centered around strengthening global partnerships for sustainable development. It emphasizes the importance of collaboration, cooperation, and multi-stakeholders partnerships in achieving the other Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 17 recognizes that addressing the complex challenges of sustainable development requires collective action and the mobilization of resources, knowledge, and expertise from various stakeholders. Overall, the Peace Division of UNITAR plays a crucial role in peace building by providing training, capacity development, technical expertise, knowledge sharing, and fostering partnerships. It offers contribution to enhancing the skills of knowledge of peace builders, promoting effective peace building strategies, and creating an enabling environment for sustainable peace and development. By supporting the work of individuals and institutions involved in peace building, the Peace Division helps building resilient societies and contribute to broader mission of the United Nations in maintaining international peace and security. In conclusion, allow me to thank you all for your active supports and the contributions in making our inaugural conference a success. Thank you very much.
Joining us from the Technological University, Dublin, we'll now hear from Dr. Owen Langan, Dean Faculty of Business.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here in this lovely city of Bonn at the UNITAR campus and to be invited to give some opening remarks at this inaugural research event. I'm sure this exciting event will continue to grow in future years. And I'm also pleased to be joined by my TU Dublin colleagues. And we really look forward to the development of our nascent partnership with UNITAR over the coming years, especially in the area of research. I plan to outline my views on the role of business schools in developing sustainability leaders of the future. But first, a brief introduction to TU Dublin. TU Dublin was Ireland's first technological university. So it was founded on the 1st of January 2019. So we're just coming up to our 5-year anniversary. And technical education in Ireland has really only been around since the 1970s, even though one of our founding institutions dates back to the late 1800s, but obviously very strong in Germany with your TUs and universities of applied sciences. So originally it was very much focused on applied learning with 2-year certificates and 3-year diplomas and apprenticeships. And we're redesignated as Institute of Technologies in the 1990s and started to generate a more focus on research. And now all but 2 of the Institutes of Technologies have become technological universities that offers programs of studies from apprenticeship right up to PhD programs. And research is very much a key part of what we do. In the 90s, the Irish government put funding into the development of research. That was part funded by a US philanthropist with very strong Irish roots called Chuck Feeney. He passed away recently, but Chuck Feeney was one of the founders of the Giving While Living initiative that's now followed by the likes of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. So that program was transformational in terms of research, and as a result of which now, we as technological universities, we're very much active in the Horizon program, Erasmus Plus, Marie Curie applications, and Ireland is very pro-EU, unlike our near neighbours across the Irish Sea. And it's interesting to note the clamour from them to rejoin the Horizon program, which they did recently. So I'm a graduate of the sector, and hence I have a very strong understanding of the value it gives to graduates. At TU Dublin, we have our strategic plan has three pillars: people, planet, and partnership, very much based on the UN SDGs, and aligned very well to the UNITAR divisions, hence another reason to collaborate. And I suppose one thing about Ireland in terms of participation rates in higher education is very high. We're the 4th largest in the OECD, behind Korea, in the mid 60%. And even within TU Dublin, it's not necessarily balanced. Like within TU Dublin, we have a city centre campus where the participation rates in higher ed would be up above 90%. Yet on campus in another part of Dublin, less socioeconomic, where it has more socioeconomic challenges, that participation rate would be low as 20%. But education has been a key driver of the success of the Irish economy. And while some will say it's our corporate tax rate that is the driver of success, I would say that the tax rate definitely was a factor in bringing organisations foreign direct investment into Ireland. But it's the talent that those organisations now stay for. Ireland is a very liberal and diverse country that is agile and very, very pro-business. And it's one that has been transformed in the last 20 or 30 years from the one that I immigrated from in the late 1980s. The expansion of FDI operations internally within the likes of companies like Intel, Google, Facebook, now far outweighs the new investment that comes in. There probably isn't a US multinational tech company or pharma company that doesn't have a presence in Ireland. And research and innovation is key to future development, and as a result of which government policy is very much focused on that. And another important factor within the success of the Irish economy has been peace. This year celebrates the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement that has brought peace to the Ireland and has been also a major factor in the transformation of the Irish economy. And in terms of sustainability, my belief is that the political leaders are failing us and society. They're not living up to their commitments. We heard, you look at Trump in the US, the Conservative government in the UK. You recently saw the decision by the court in Germany to block 60 billion of unused COVID funds to be used for sustainable purposes. And you had the United Nations obviously coming out this week in terms of saying that we're going to be well short of meeting our targets for 2030. So I would contend that education and higher education need to step into that breach and start, developing the future leaders around sustainability. Why is business important within that? Well, I suppose, from UNESCO facts, 1 in 3 students are studying either business, management, law, or economics. And 70 million graduates globally come from business disciplines. And business schools nowadays are very much focused on accreditation. Accreditation, you've probably heard the triple accredited, which means you're accredited by AMBA for your MBA, AACSB, and ICWIS. And what they're all about is showing that you have high standards, that you're focused on impact, you're focused on making a difference. And business schools really have embraced that. And I would contend that they can do it in 2 ways, ensuring that sustainability is first front and center in the minds of our graduates as they enter the workforce, and that they become advocates for sustainability. While it might take them a few years to reach executive level, they can commence that lobbying from day one, and even during the interview stage, for graduates, by quizzing potential employers around their commitments to sustainability. And you're seeing more and more graduates are want to work for companies that have a purpose. The second area then is reskilling and upskilling the existing workforces and instilling those that engage in lifelong learning in terms of a call to transformational action in their organizations in terms of sustainability. And I'm going to briefly outline to you indeed how many other business schools or HEIs do that implement sustainability within their programs of study. But I think one other area where I think business schools can make a huge contribution to is the concept of economic growth. Economic growth needs to be in the context of sustainable. The model of economic growth based on consumption, in my view, needs to change. And to that end, I really like the quote, I'm sure many are familiar with it, in terms of by Mahatma Gandhi, where it says that the earth has enough resources for our need, but not for our greed. And to that end, most of you be familiar with the concept of donut economics and the work of Kay Rayworth in the UK on that. which is about, you know, a means for humanity to thrive in the 21st century by developing the mindset and ways of thinking that we need to get there. Now, I'm not going to talk about donut economics, because if I did, we'd be here all evening. And but if you haven't heard about it or you want to learn more about it, just Google Kate Raworth. There's an excellent 15-minute TED Talk, and there's an excellent company and website, donuteconomics.org, that has fantastic resources on it. It's really about developing leaders in sustainability, you know, and, you know, in terms of business schools, it requires, you know, really requires a comprehensive and integrated approach that goes beyond traditional business education. And, you know, some of the initiatives that we've done within the faculty business is to bring sustainability into the curriculum. And that the first question you got asked in terms of when you're bringing sustainability into the curriculum is, do you bring in an individual module, so maybe you have 2 or 3 modules over the course of the program, or do you embed it in all courses? You know, ensuring that students understand the environmental, social, and ethical dimensions of business. You know, and the approach that we're taking, and I would advocate that any business school should be taking, is that you need to embed sustainability in your curriculum. Otherwise, it'll just become a standalone module and they don't see the integrated aspect. The other area then is applied learning opportunities, you know, such as internships, projects, and within faculty, within, I suppose, higher education in Ireland, it's very much constructivism in terms of our approach to education, and particularly social constructivism. So we do try to use case studies, you know, that's when the likes of, you know, partnering with the likes of UNITAR, other NGOs, government agencies to, you know, to demonstrate sustainability practices and bring them into the classroom, which then talks, next one is bringing in industry into that classroom. You know, getting people who are actually doing it on the ground to come in and share their experiences with students, and also fosters relationships with industry. Third area is through research initiatives. And again, conferences like this are a fantastic opportunity to share research and to outline what we are doing. The pedagogical approaches to that are very important. And related to that as well is the development of your own staff, our own academic staff, in terms of that. And my colleagues here from our sustainability education team will be talking tomorrow about some of the initiatives that they've taken. And a lot of our staff have undertaken CPD professional development around how to embed sustainability into their curriculum. Ethical leadership development is obviously really important, to emphasize the importance of ethical leadership and responsible decision making in the curriculum, and to instill a sense of social responsibility in future business leaders. And again, case studies are a fantastic way to do that. Equally, a global perspective is very important on sustainability. We tend to concentrate very much on the Irish and EU situation. You know, we spend very little time talking about the global south. We spend a lot of time talking about the global north, and that's something we need to look at. Cross-disciplinary approach is really important, and that's one that we're still working on, you know, in terms of that business students have the opportunity to engage with students in other disciplines, be it engineering, public policy, you know, science, the humanities, to promote a more holistic understanding of sustainability issues. And the other element of it is leadership development programs, you know, to encourage students to become leaders in sustainability, help them to build the skills they can advocate for positive change. And another area is around certification and accreditation, effectively micro credentials or digital badges that you can offer students so they can say to employers that we have done some sustainability. And obviously continual professional development, continuous learning, upskilling people that are in the workforce sustainability program. And we have a joint master's with UNITAR, which is very much focused on developing global sustainability leaders of the future. But before I finish my opening remarks, I wish to thank the organizers of the conference. As I know from personal experience, good and bad, the level of work that goes into organizing events such as this. And I do wish to call out one person, even though she advised the limelight all the time, and she'll give out to me later for doing it, is Dr. Lucia Morales, my colleague down there on the left, from our School of Accounting, Economics and Finance. Her tireless work has been a driver for the establishment of this conference, along with John Hans Coetzee from UNITAR and all the other colleagues from UNITAR. So in conclusion, I contend that education at all levels needs to play a key role in creating the leaders in sustainability of the future, and that higher education, needs to be a key driver of this. We cannot operate in silos. We need global cooperation and sharing of experiences and knowledge. And as Nikhil just outlined in his remarks and in his speech to students when he came to TU Dublin back in October, partnerships are key. Partnerships that allow and facilitate collective action, international cooperation, and the strengthening of multilateral cooperation and collaboration, especially within higher education, in creating new knowledge constructs and paradigms, and cooperating in open and actionable research for the acceleration and implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. By working together, we can address common threads such as climate change, terrorism, and pandemics, and build a more peaceful and prosperous future for all. Thank you very much.
We'll now proceed to keynote speakers and the discussion panel, which will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Jan Hans Coetzee, Senior Specialist of the Online Learning and Education Unit at UNITAR.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just also recognize the online participants, which we don't see, but just to extend to those of you who've joined us online, thank you very much for taking the time and to connect and to listen. And we do invite you towards the end, as the discussions are involving, please feel free to, in the chat box, pop in your questions that you would like to ask, and we'd be happy to also engage with you. So many things and important statements were made, but allow me to build on two of those. One is the reality of the climate security risks that we all face, and it's not any more limited to the global north or the global south. We've seen during this summer across Europe, we have seen the reality. We also have seen the tensions. It started with COVID. And as soon as society does not function, there are different stresses, and that even in the global north, the underbelly of tensions in society. So how do we, in terms of this critical question of climate security, peace, and development, how important is collaborative partnerships for working towards, first, securing human security? Second is, how do we share experiences and practices for that peace and stability and development that applies to all of us? And this is where I would like, if the panel members would agree, rather than us going and delivering statements, because we've heard a lot, and you have such a treasure trove of experience, of scholarship, and insights, and practices that we have in the panel members. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and ask to frame it more as part of that must-have critical discussions. And I would like to start with Dr. Brendan Jennings, who's the Vice President of Research for the Technological University of Dublin, and ask him in his work and the vision that he has, how do you ensure that you drive the research that is relevant to your learning community, but also in terms of when we look at what the UN Secretary General was saying, we've met only 50% of the Sustainable Development Goals, the targets. If we look at gender equality, we need another 350 years before we're going to reach it. So how do you, in your role in research, see the key elements of collaborative partnerships and the vision and the leadership that your institution has already taken in delivering those important goals and targets of the Sustainable Development? If you could just briefly share with us some of those oversights, please.
On hands for the straightforward question. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We've collectively failed to make the progress we had envisaged. I was very taken recently by the World Economic Forum's concept of a poly crisis, and that the world is facing all these interconnected risks that compound each other, and therefore the impact is greater than we would have had individually. And I think that really speaks to the breadth of the challenge, because each of these individual risks is so complex in their own right. And I think it's very important that universities play a leadership role in figuring out a new way to try and solve these. So if I were to critique research in universities as it's kind of evolved over the centuries, I think we have a problem in that we're far too siloed in our own discipline areas, and we need to find new ways of working with each other, even within individual universities, not minding between universities and between other partners. So I think there's different facets to that. I think even the way our universities are structured, even physically in terms of buildings, putting different faculties in different buildings, creates this artificial separation that means that people don't talk to each other. I think there's also in academia a little bit of a very conservative approach to risk. Our risk appetite, strangely, isn't really the way it should be. Because so many academics respond to incentives in terms of the way their work is recognized and career pathways, etc. Many of us tend to take a very conservative approach, and that's kind of largely to do with the way we assess research in a university context, in terms of the individual for promotional purposes, in terms of departments or schools and universities as a whole. So we need to break out of that old way of doing things. And I think that is, what we need to focus more on engagement outside the walls of the university, and acknowledge that it takes a long time for people from different disciplinary areas to even understand each other's terminology and to get a basic understanding so that we can work together. So our timeframes need to be a bit longer. We need to accept that failure is going to be part of this, and we need to give these relationships time. So I suppose I think that's what, as a new university, although with a long track record, as Owen described, we are trying to do in terms of building partnerships that have a different approach in terms of the risk taking, and that builds slowly over time, and try and bring as many of the actors together, and just realize that it is genuinely complex. So I think the more universities kind of adopt that kind of approach, the more chance we'll have of really understanding the issues and working to deliver tangible benefits to communities and to society more widely.
Thank you very much. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to invite you to jump on a plane, and we're going to shuttle across the ocean to Canada. And we're going to ask Dr. Bruno Charbonneau, who's full professor of international studies and the director of the Center for Security and Crisis Governance at the Royal Military College of St. Jean. And I would like to specifically ask you, because you've done quite a lot of work in terms of the human impact in the Anthropocene, and also related to that nexus of conflict, peace, and development. But I would specifically like to ask you, in terms of the sustainable development and the application of it, how your work has evolved in terms of how we work with sustainable development goals in terms of term, concept to a principle of strategy to deliver those goals that has an equal responsibility across nations, peoples, and communities.
Thanks a lot. That's not what I prepared, but I'll try. I mean, I guess I can try to answer your question by referring to my last trip to West Africa, where I followed a group of scientists from Dakar trying to promote their work in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And what I'm going to say actually, I think, follows up on what Dr. Jennings was saying in terms of silos, working in silos. Because if I think about climate security, trying to talk about it, research it, do it, achieving climate security, whatever that means, because that's another issue. It's a vague concept. I see a few challenges, and one of them is climate literacy, and maybe that goes to your point about the need for multidisciplinary work and abolishing those silos. In my work, whether it's in West Africa or Montreal, or I'm talking also with NATO or UN people and so on and so forth, there is limited knowledge about climate change per se. I am not going to pretend that I'm a climate scientist, but I read as much as I can on climate sciences. And so that leads to all sorts of assumptions that people make to bridge the gaps between what we know about climate change and their impacts on security, peace, sustainable development, and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that definitely needs, that remains and needs to be addressed. Linked to that, all the translation issues that I'm seeing between different disciplines, different practitioners, different, in particular, between the climate sciences and people like me who do social sciences or the UN agencies, actors in the field of security, peace, development, humanitarian action, between those who do long-term strategy thinking, between those who do crisis management in the short term, and between spaces. Obviously, north-south was brought up earlier. I think that's also another issue. So those are very key to me challenges in terms of trying to implement and achieve climate security, whether you link it to sustainable development or not. To go back to my last trip to the West African Sahel, the development actors actually in the countries I went to, Burkina, Niger, and Mali, are also leaving the country to some extent because of the political context right now. So all that's left are humanitarian actors who are overwhelmed by actually the crisis management that they're into. And so talking to them about climate change does not. It's very hard to have that conversation, because they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the resources, they don't have the people, they don't have the time, they don't have the expertise to figure out how that applies or what that means for their work, given that they're just trying to save lives on a daily basis. And that I think is true whether you talk to UN agencies or local NGOs, by the way. So whether national, even governments, certain ministries, and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, maybe to answer your question, I think we are at this point where there's no more debate, for instance, about actually connecting climate change and its security consequences, like we've seen in last decade or so at UN Security Council, for instance, to just point to one example, where people argue that we shouldn't even make that link, or it was very dubious, and so on and so forth. I think we've moved beyond that. But now the question is really one of implementing, institutionalizing, but we have also to recognize that this is very much a political struggle, a power struggle in many ways, especially when you go to places like West Africa, where a bunch of white people like me go there to talk about climate change. There are hesitation or critique, let's say, or worries about knowledge extraction, for instance, or just another reason to come into their countries, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So implementation institutionalization, I think, is a key challenge. And if you think about development, the old development model, and I'll conclude here, which was based on basically building industrialization, or the industrialized model of development, and you mentioned economic growth, which is linked to that model. Well, obviously, climate change tells us, or climate sciences tell us, that this model is not sustainable at all. So what does that mean to the development under those conditions is far from clear, I think, and a settled question.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that the United Nations have articulated, when we look at climate change and possible security implications, they highlight 5 key elements. One has to do with vulnerability, development, coping and security mechanism, statelessness, and national and international conflict. At the heart of all of these elements is health. And I'm going to invite Professor Donald Donoghue, who's the president of the World Association for Disaster and Emergency Medicine and professor with the University of Maryland in Baltimore, to talk specifically about the importance of health in the climate impact.
Health lies, as you said, health lies at the core of everything we do. There's a demonstrated direct correlation between societal viability, economic viability, political viability, and stability. When a nation's people are not healthy, the nation's not healthy. Climate change, as has been already mentioned, cuts across many. We tend to think of rising sea levels, which happens, but it impacts weather events, recent floods. Canadian colleague, people in Washington, D.C. were having respiratory problems because of wildfires in northern Canada. It impacts agriculture. It impacts the water. Both runoff creates algal blooms, which kills fish and can hurt humans if they're in the water. So across the board, it's getting a multidisciplinary. I recently read a great description. Interdisciplinary is when we kind of work with each other. Multidisciplinary is if we're all working kind of towards the same direction. The transdisciplinary is what we need to be, where we're all working together with towards the same goals. And we really, some years ago, I heard a great we've talked about silos. I heard a great comment in what was formerly our Institute of Medicine, is we've exercised and we've risen above silos. We now operate in cylinders of excellence. And I shamelessly use that line. And so identifying, and I've heard a lot from the business school, identifying that there's a discrete body of knowledge that we need to share. B, that we do not do a good job of sharing. And when we do share, we find out that we have different terminology and different beliefs and different approaches. But ultimately, and it's aligning organizations like UNITAR, WHO, UNESCO, NGOs, academia, is getting us all in rooms like this to talk to each other. Because now my organization, we focus on disaster and emergency medicine, but the first part of that is prevention and mitigation. As was said earlier, if I can prevent a disaster, then I've done a good job. If I can't prevent it, then do I have the capability to respond? And COVID showed a lot of weaknesses. Unfortunately, COVID may be mild compared to what may come next. So we really need to pay closer attention to what we're doing, and I'm preaching to the choir, as we say in the US. But, health lies at the foundation of everything. If I'm not healthy, you can't pour from an empty glass. If the people aren't healthy, we're never going to sustain, we're never going to grow. We're just going to suffer.
Thank you very much, Donald. Owen mentioned several times, so did Brendan, the important role of education. And we frame it very often under the paradigm of the education for sustainable development. And I would like to invite Dr. Caroline Varron, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Professors Without Borders, and to ask her to share with us part of her panel that she's going to host about how can we generate more value in terms of sharing, but also learning from the global south in terms of, because when we talk about sustainable development as a term, in so many of the traditional cultures, that term and concept has been used for many, many generations, for centuries. And then when it became politically appropriate, it was taken up as part of the discussion as a principle for strategy. And the reality is, if we look today, there is a lot of greenwashing going on. And how can we, in collaborative partnerships, focusing on education for sustainable development, and it was mentioned, how can we further develop those important skills, attitudes, behaviors, and values that is captured in SDG literacy?
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to answer in a wider way first, since you took my speech away from me, and come back to your first question about driving relevant research, because I think it is linked very closely to education for development, both in terms of its strengths and in terms of its weaknesses. So the first thing I'm going to say, research and education share a common goal, or should share a common goal, which is also norm shaping. Education is not just about skills and knowledge. We have enough politicians and scientists and leaders with a lot of degrees, but the decisions that they make are also shaped by where they come from and the education that they've had. So universities do have to be drivers of norms and of attitudes, of behaviors, not just of skills and knowledge. If you fail that, then we are going to do some fantastic things, both for science, for medicine, for military, and create new problems that we're not capable or willing to address. So how do we change norms? Well, to a certain extent, exposure to other ideas, openness, getting out of our silos. So it is a problem in education. Obviously, we're very siloed in academia, but also among countries. You mentioned COVID earlier. The first thing countries did was to close their borders. Knowledge sharing needs to take place on every single level, and it starts with exposure to others, and frankly, sometimes to any other, in a peaceful manner. Research also needs to be accessible, just like education, and both of these remain behind paywalls. In the case of research, a lot of greedy publishers continue to have very high profit margins in academia, and that doesn't really trickle down to academics. Let's be honest, it's part of that free work that academics like to do. I don't mean that ironically. Professors Without Borders would not exist without the heart and passion and volunteering of academics who are fantastic at sharing their experiences, their perceptions, their skills, and hoping to inspire change without directing change. Empowering is giving space to each to develop their potential, but challenging them to think about their potential and the impact that that has. Research, just like education, needs to be focused not just on quantity, not that many students graduating or how many things have you published, but the quality. And sometimes these rankings for research and education look a little bit like the credit ratings in 2007. Those of us who remember the impact of it. Technology is a huge game changer, and I don't need to preach to the choir. You know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of online learning, but it's not just online learning. We mentioned the barriers of language. Yes, we speak different languages in different departments, but we just speak different languages within one country. Translations are fantastic. Why not encourage people to work more in their own language rather than keep them away from publishing because their English isn't good enough? Translations today are automated. What an enabler. Self-publishing would be an option if universities would allow that. However, we have to continue to publish with a couple of named publishers and be read by, on average, 2 people, of which one is your reviewer. And isn't open access something else? Being able to access important information, research in health, in education, in everything. Producing research doesn't matter if you cannot make it accessible to those who can do something with it. I'm not mentioning the politicians because they're not going to read your research, they'll read the briefing or maybe the abstract. But having research accessible is massively empowering, and that is transformational. Of course, then you have the other problem of finding good research and, you know, who is deciding what that is. But let's let people try and decide for themselves as long as they have access to that. So a lot of things that we know we can do better. We have the tools to change things if we want to, whether it's universities changing their policies for promotion, which would be pretty spectacular and transformational. It's not just about research, education. Well, universities are about education and creating the future leaders. So I'm not sure I really answered your question. Education for development is about exposure, it's about access, it's about sharing. It's not about imposing one thing over the other. But considering the way humanity looks today, I'm going to say the most important thing for me as a parent, as a professional, as an academic, as a teacher, is to think about education for the future. And that means, unfortunately, changing a lot of behaviors and changing norms. And that's where I think universities have a place to play.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And just to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, you've had from each of the keynote speakers and panelists of so many of the tomorrow, some of these keynote panelists that's going to take place. I hope they've given you a as we say, an appetiti temptatus. So please feel free to join their sessions tomorrow, where they will really expand on the sort of small window of the value proposition that they've just given. I would now like to invite Dr. Daniel Rashmiel from the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. He's the program director of the Master of Arts with UNITAR in Conflict, Peace and Security Law and Political Science Studies. When it comes to research and education, but the learning through the asynchronous model, which gives access to people, please tell us how you believe your institution and your experience have contributed to this impact of research, collaborative partnerships, and how you contribute to that debate.
So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see this finally taking place. So thank you to UNITAR for making it happen. So very briefly, it was very interesting to listen what you have been pointing out and what the question is about asynchronous learning. So for the ones that you don't know, Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, what was one of the first online universities, and we have like been teaching for online for 25 years now. And we have like 70,000 students all over the world. So learning in asynchronous mode, and actually from our experience as the program co-director with UNITAR, I was hearing what you were saying about research, and I think that's the goal with learning. It makes no sense to do research and not sense to teach if you're not capable to reach everyone that could benefit from what is being researched and that you want to teach. So the fact that we are enabling our programs in asynchronous mode, it's a little bit filling the gap and going from traditional lectures or like just as it happened during COVID times to do like synchronic online like teaching and enabling different kind of profiles of learners and independent learners that they want perhaps to complete the information that you are offering them. So here I will throw a little bit the appetite for tomorrow as well. I don't want to do spoilers, but it's a little bit believing as well. I believe that actually asynchronous teaching and learning, it's a part of this circular pedagogy where us as educators and us as teachers, professors, we also enable students, we believe that they are learners and they could also, in their own rhythm, in their own like dynamics of like combining learning and professional experience, they could enable us to give us the flow and with that asynchronous mode. So I don't know if that answers a little bit, but that's what I think. And I think that from our experience has been great. And actually, it's something that I would like also to learn from the different persons here and go back to you, John Hans. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Ladies and gentlemen, when I made the comment earlier on and I said, when we look at gender equality, it's going to take us 350 years. Can I invite you to look at the panel in front of you? 8 men, 3 ladies. So, and this is why there is such a need to have more individuals across the spectrum who would feel comfortable to be able to participate in conferences like this, so that we can have that balanced, critical discussion, even from a gender perspective, because I can reach out to the ladies and they will tell us, we have so many different filters that we use to make decisions, sometimes about critical things. And very often in our discussions, that sensitivity and the connectiveness of our common humanity is very often forgotten. And this is why it's a particular pleasure to introduce Dr. Dolapo Facaudo, who's the program leader for the Master of Social Science in Intelligence, Security and Disaster Management of the School of Law of Social Sciences from the University of Derby. And I'm going to ask both Dolapo and Dr. Terry Savage, who is the Associate Professor of Conflict Resolution Studies of Nova Southeastern University Research Fellow, the KU Leuven board member, and also a board member of the Swiss Restorative Justice Forum. Because, ladies and gentlemen, they are both representatives of the Global South, who now comes and they are sharing their experiences in the global north. So I'm not going to ask you a particular question, but I'm going to open the floor and to say, please share with us, what are your contribution and the way, the specific lens that you're going to be using when you chair your panel discussions. Dolapo.
Thank you for the very grand introduction. At some point, I was lost and wondering where the second lady who was going to talk was coming from. Well, that's me. Distinguished panelists and ladies and gentlemen, well, thanks for not asking any question, which throws the ground open. I think I'm particularly fortunate to traveled and ended up in a field that is truly multidisciplinary. I lead the program that is intelligence, security, and disaster management. Just because one is not problematic enough, we just had to combine the all three together. Disaster management in its true essence is multidisciplinary. This program sits across three colleges, three schools: School of Health and Social Care, School of Built and Natural Environment, and School of Law and Social Sciences. If we don't want to talk, we are forced to talk. We have modules across the three schools, and students have 3 core modules and 7 optional modules. I think that's the first time I've seen that, more optional than the core, which gives them the flexibility to actually pick across the schools. It is deliberate. We have something at the University of Derby because it's an applied university that thrives in empowering students, empower people across the globe to truly engage. So each college, each school have some kind of laboratory or functional unit for teaching practice. So for example, in my School of Law and Social Sciences, we have a court. And there are days that you dress up and we invite the judge in. We have a police station, and where we actually teach criminology and teach policing program. The School of Health and Social Care, we have a hospital, and we graduate nurses for the NHS. So we don't only bring the practitioners into this university, we also take our students out. So for example, on my program, I collaborate with the Ministry of Defense in the UK, and next Wednesday, we're going to the military base. So they are going to do civil military leadership. So I think in a way, based on my experience responding, supporting, leading, and coordinating response across Asia and Pacific, growing up in Africa, having some affiliation with the States and Europe, that I've been able to bring that experience to the class. But beyond that is also acknowledging the uniqueness, the collegiality, and also the knowledge transfer that needs to take place. This will not take place for sustainable development if you don't create a platform for it. If UNITAR didn't organize this workshop, this conference, we all won't be here. And I think it's finding the unique platform for which we can all come together to exchange knowledge. But beyond that, I think Dr. Carolyn said something very important, is defining who utilizes and how the research is used. How do we define that? For time immemorial, we've been construed by what research should look like, what teaching should look like. University of Derby just got Teaching Excellence Framework Gold, and we're very delighted about it. But this was in no way done in a traditional way. We combine a combination of assessment modules, we run simulation exercises. So it's not just sitting exams, but trying to find a platform, an enabling environment for students to learn, to share. Because we have students who are not just fresh off the pond, but also practitioners. Where is that knowledge? Where is that platform for experience sharing? I have quite a number of students from Africa who are top government officials. I am trying to understand those problems through their lens and then find the way to help them integrate it into the concept we teach in class so that they can go back and explore solutions, African solutions for African problems. The same thing for the Middle Eastern, the same thing for the Asians. This is truly important. But the common grounds we have is the Sustainable Development Goals. When we map them, it's a social, economic, and environmental, regardless of where you are, whether in the global south or the global north. When we have events of climate change, climatological events, they would have those three impacts, regardless of your color, regardless of your level of development, regardless of your GDP. We have seen COVID do that in a spectacular way, even though that's a pandemic. But when we have flooding, it does that also, whether it's happening in Somalia or whether it's happening in Germany. We have seen what flood can do. We have seen what drought can do in Australia. We have seen it being done in the Horn of Africa. This social, this economic, and this environmental impact would force people, would shrink the system, and would put a demand and a stress on resources, which often generates crisis, which often generates friction, which often generates conflict. And then we go into interventions that are silo in its approach. Isn't this where the multidisciplinary research that should influence teaching, that should also influence learning? And by having that platform for knowledge exchange, it also further informs future research, which is where now, one thing I'm very excited about, what we call impact case study. So now this is refable in the UK. So I can engage in impact case study, assess them, and get ref for it. That is fantastic. It doesn't have to be the old traditional publication. And so in collaboration with my students, we are assessing the impact of different UN projects in Afghanistan and in the UK through NGOs. This is truly revolutionary. And this, I think, might be not all, but part of glimpse that we might just be walking in the right direction. But I can say that because I have a unique program that is multidisciplinary. So we are compelled to work across different colleges and different schools. What about others and other programs in the universities or education institutions that aren't designed that way? This is where the problem lies. Why aren't we engaging? Why aren't we collaborating? What are the barriers? What are the limiting factors? And how can we create enabling environments and enabling factors to improve on the things that we know would work, the things that are working, and the things that have just remained stubborn and won't work? How do we then subject them to further research? Terry, over to you.
Thank you, Dolapo. And if I may, guten Abend. Entschuldigung, ich spreche nur ein bisschen Deutsch, aber ich bin sehr glücklich, ich bin hier und ich möchte vielen Dank sagen. Climate crisis that we are facing now is about justice. I'd like to put this proposition to you. There are so many issues. I come from a department of conflict resolution studies. And when I applied to be chair of the department, coming out of a history of practice, not an academic career, I put my stick in the ground and said, if we're going to work on conflict resolution, it has to be about the environment. And Nova Southeastern University has an extraordinary oceanographic center and has particular work going on with coral. And I'd like just to illustrate a little of the work that we're doing. So in Florida, for all the other perversities that come out of Florida, which I won't get into now, but don't start me. There is a thriving tourism industry in which coral and scuba diving and snorkeling is integral. Florida is also subjected to hurricanes of increasing intensity. So emergency authorities in the US are looking at clearing a new area off one of the coasts in order to create more space for emergency equipment and so on. This is a very noble thing to do, save lives. It's going to clean out the coral. You have a business sector that thrives on the coral industry. And in the midst of all of that, you have the fact that coral is an integral part of the ecosystem for all life underwater. How do you negotiate a conflict like that? My point is, everybody is right within their own mandates, within their own fields of expertise. Safety, tourism, good life in Florida, the life of the oceans. I don't have an answer to that, at least not yet. But that is partly why I went to Florida, was to work with these kinds of conflicts that are coming up, and it's a hotspot. Jon Hans will know from my own history in South Africa that I always wanted to be crossing lines as a Mukiwa, a paler fleshed Southern African born into that region. And going to Florida, I was crossing lines again. But before I go any further, let me also say thanks. Jon Hans, without your inspiration and your charisma in the Weberian sense, I'm here in the land of the fabulous Max Weber. Your charisma, that is huge reason why I am here. And I thank you for all you have put into the event and your team. There are many involved, I know. Thank you. Climate crises are about justice. Here's, I think, a well-known fact. If the Kenyan president, at least, is to be believed, in his address at last year's COP, Africa contributes 3% to global warming. Now, we've heard from Dr. Charbonneau about how otherworldly, my words, not yours, some of the discussion on climate change and so on might be, and the need for innovation, the need to prioritize this in Africa. I'm not just saying that, you know, Africa is kind of not the problem and we should be protecting ourselves against different kinds of accusations that we are overpopulation in some of the cities, etc. Of course, these issues need to be addressed. But there is a risk that the discussion about climate change comes across as yet another colonial enterprise in Africa. We've had the missionaries coming in. Their message was good and necessary, salvation of souls. We've had development projects right through to the economic structural adjustment programs that broke countries. And now we have climate science. How do we bridge that? What kind of discussions do we have? What works? I would like to put to you just two ideas we have that we work with in conflict resolution. This is my passion, the department I'm in. Firstly, conflict is always about people. All conflicts are about people. And so there has to be some way of working with people to work these issues out. When we are working with African leaders, let's also be clear on that. Many come from positions from political elites, and they are accustomed to negotiations that are mortal. We live or die on how we negotiate. So to talk about the end of the world, potentially, is nothing new. So how do we make this important? Working with people. We have two techniques that we work with a great deal. One is developed by someone called Sarah Cobb, called narrative grading. And she says that in conflict settings, everybody, as I mentioned earlier, sees themselves as part of a story, sees themselves as heroic, defending certain values, defending an industry, tourism in Florida. defending something they value. But when conflict arises, as it's happening particularly now in this crisis, and climate issues are there in conflicts over resources, as well as a cross-cutting issue in other conflicts. As conflicts arise, identities tend to shrivel and narrow and simplify. Just look around us in the past few weeks, how simplistic the alliances that people have chosen to attach themselves to have become. People have said words of hate that you never would have expected, because suddenly they're tied to a particular side in the debate. Narrative braiding is about doing the opposite. It's about deliberately and as a discipline, learning to articulate your views, not only in a way that is clear or makes sense to you or to your discipline, but specifically in terms designed to be comprehensible with the other side, with those with whom you are fighting. So if we're looking at tourism in Florida, how do I make the question of coral important for them? The second tool we use is something called reflective listening. And reflective listening is simply about being a mirror to what the other person is saying. It's not, this sort of technique-y language of what I hear you saying is, we get rid of all of that and we only bounce back what the person is saying in terms that we can understand and the passion that is driving them, calling the emotion that's there. This makes you angry. This hurts. One of the effects of that is that it helps people to stop clamoring for space in the debate, and it opens space for that narrative braiding. So to conclude, you've heard us introduced as coming from the global south. Thank you, Jan Hans. How to work with contexts like West Africa, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, work in Southern Africa, bringing this project of saving the planet. Part of it I would put to you is that we need to find the space to listen, not just come impassioned with facts and the science, as real as that is. I'm not denying that for a moment, but in a way that learns to reflect and listen while holding on to that and earning the right to speak and be heard. That is where the narrative braiding and the shared future may come from. So that's some of what we're working with in my department, conflict resolution studies at Nova Southeastern University. As I say, I didn't come from a background in academia. I just arrived there last year, and this was my motivation, was to tackle this cross-cutting and absolutely existential issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dolapo and Terry. Before I'm going to give the opportunity to Frank and to Owen to conclude by talking very briefly about the value proposition of the collaboration between UNITAR and TU Dublin, what that will constitute. Allow me just to loop to Dr. Amir Manfous, who's involved in research, head of research for TU Dublin. And the question I would like to ask you is, could you please talk to us how you see the opportunity of applied research focusing on all the different elements that constitute climate security?
Thanks, Johannes. And I thought like I have a kind of intervention without a question, but there's no problem. I will go for that. Actually, it's during my role as a faculty head of research in the Faculty of Business. There are two important issues. We figured out that that we have to focus on just to help us just to push the research engine a bit in the faculty. And of course, like this will reflect on the partnership piece and collaboration piece, and how would this like develop research further. Two things is the talent piece of thing and the impact thing. As Owen mentioned, Ireland is not just like distinguished as a country that attract foreign investment because of the corporate tax. We have, I would say, a good base of talented people that is already raised in Ireland, and already Ireland became very attractive for themselves to come there. And I just like, I refer to a talk by Philip Nolan in one of our events in TU Dublin. And Philip Nolan is a director, general director of SFI, Science Foundation Ireland. And he is the chief executive of a new fund agency. And all his talk was focusing on the talent and how we attract talent, how we build the born talents, researchers and people, and how we build the whole ecosystem on that. And this is something like in the faculty we focus on very significantly. We try to find ways to attract talents, starting from students, PhD students, attract talents for scholars, our staff members, and not only attract the talents, but we are working hard to retain the talents, because you know that we are in a very competitive space where just like when you have talented people, the market is open for themselves. So it is kind of something, it's represent a challenge for ourselves just to keep the talents and build upon them and attract them as well. The other thing that I may just like to go quickly through it is the impact piece. And just like from my a bit of experience of managing a kind of some research projects with enterprise partners and in some cases with policymakers, and for my kind of overview on the strategic directions of the EU funds the EU funders in terms of trying to bring the research down to have an impact, try to get the research outcomes down to to societies, to the communities, to the enterprise partners, and even to the policymakers. Just like try to make kind of the decisions taken is evidence-based rather than just like that we are talking about two silos, researchers in a way of the societies, communities, enterprise partners, and policymakers. But we notice a big challenge in that in terms of the pace of researchers compared to the other partners of the enterprise partners, policymakers, and the society partners. We also witness kind of challenges in terms of how research inform policies, the different agendas, the different views, the different perspectives. In some meetings, when we sit down with the policymakers, we sit down with the industry associations and researchers, you directly spot how those people are different in everything. And just like to have a successful outcome of a collaboration between themselves, I think we need to have some work and some effort to close these gaps between those these minds, which are really, really different. So, and that's why we are trying, and I know that in the university and Brendan here, we are working to have a kind of a specific unit for impact and engagement. Those people are trying to provide kind of views for our researchers, how to achieve impact for your research outcomes, how you provide kind of the pace and the outcomes that help policymakers and help decision makers in industry to take decisions based on evidence and based on research outcomes. So I would say that an opportunity like what we have today, today and tomorrow, is a great opportunity, just like to talk to each other, to know the perspectives, to know the culture of how we doing things, and we try to close these gaps, just like to achieve to the main objective that we have, an impact of our research on the policies and decision making on the business and society thing. So just like my thoughts on that, and thanks for this.
Thank you very much. Owen, then Frank, please, your concluding comments.
Come back on one thing that Brendan said earlier on, and maybe a bit on the gender equality, and then talk about that. I mean, I do think that the only way of gender equality is targets, and funding mechanisms in Ireland. The higher education authority who fund higher education has set specific targets for higher education institutions. It's 40% female representation across all levels. Athena Swan, colleagues in the UK, will be very familiar with that. Others maybe not. So it's a kind of a commitment to quality, diversity, and inclusion across universities. And if you're applying for funding now from any Irish body or even EU projects, then you need to have accreditation with Athena Swan. Now that develops another whole industry just in terms of managing the accreditation, but it's how the targets or the level of participation in terms of achieving gender targets need to go up. And I suppose to mention in terms about research in silos, I think one of the challenges we have within higher education is that individuals are promoted based on individual work. And we really need to look at changing that incentive. And that incentive should be that you get promoted based on collaboration. And go back to what Don was saying there about transdisciplinary approaches. That's really where we should be going, and moving away from rewarding individuals for working individually. You get your 4-star publication, you get you're seen as a, shall we say, rock star, in terms of academia. Yet, that per individual could be working very, very niche area and not engaging in any collaboration. And if we're going to really change that, then we have to change the incentives that are associated with it. So the broader opportunities, I think events like this and any conference you go to, is the opportunity to network and the opportunity to develop and hear from colleagues, many of whom I haven't met before, in terms of their partnerships with UNITAR, and in terms of how TU Dublin is a relatively new partner to that table, can leverage that and go back to multilateralism, which we've been talking about, how we can take those opportunities and leverage them. And I know colleagues will be looking forward to more in-depth conversations with the various speakers and delegates who are presenting over tomorrow, in terms of how we can opportunities and start those conversations, because that's what I see the key element to it.
Thank you very much. Frank?
Pick up on the communication part. I think that is, I think communication is the key in all areas, and understanding. And what was mentioned before, how do we value the impact of the research results? I think it is important that politicians, business leaders are starting to base their decisions on facts as an outcome of research results. Research is not only for the one who is doing the research. I think research has to be more understandable to everyone, that research has certain outcomes, and these outcomes are based on facts. It's not just the imaginary vision of the researcher. I think there is a benefit for everyone in this world, especially for the decision makers, that they pick up the results and not just think about, there's the research, someone wrote a book, and that's how it is. And I think the collaboration between UNITAR and the TU Dublin and all the other universities that are part of it, I think that is the right way forward. And conferences like this, as we said already, it's not only the conference, to have the conference, but it's the networking part, and it's the communication of the outcomes of the conference itself. And not only to do one conference and that's it. No, we have to do that on a regular basis. Keep the network, bring the research results out to the public, and make the decisions in the right way.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you very much to each of the keynote panelists for your contribution, the reflection. But I would like to take you up on, you were saying, you know, how important it is to deliver. And there was this to create opportunities for networking. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to invite you to the 29th floor, where you will have the opportunity to network. So I thank you all for your attention. I wish you all a good evening, a good networking opportunity, and we look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. Thank you very much.